The full power of the gospel of Jesus Christ is contained in the Book of Mormon, period.
Remember this declaration by Jesus himself. Whoso treasureth up my word shall not be deceived. And in the last days, neither your heart nor your faith will fail you.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Book of Mormon podcast. As always, you have Shelby and
Kevin.
We are on episode 200, which is kind of crazy because I've been so used to saying 180, 170, but now it's 2 insert number. So that's exciting. Milestone for us.
Yeah, pretty big deal.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll just let that simmer. But we're in Mormon chapter 4 this week, and we're excited to talk about it. It's more about, like, I would say disclaimer, lots of back and forth of battles in this chapter, but I do think there's some principles that we can definitely hit on between these battles and even about the battles themselves. So I think what we should do is kind of just start with the chapter heading. Per usual, just give a little summary, and then we can kind of go into what year they're in for what we're starting this chapter off with. So it says, war and carnage continue. The wicked punish the wicked. Greater wickedness prevails than ever before in all of Israel. Women and children are sacrificed to idols. The Lamanites begin to sweep the Nephites before them. And time frame is about AD 363 to 375. So we got some crazy stuff going on here that we just read. Wickedness, wicked punishing wicked. Women and children are sacrificed to idols, and lots of Lamanite armies overtaking Nephite armies. However, doesn't begin that way. So do you have anything to say before we start, Kev?
Just remember, like we talked about last week, Mormon resigned as the Nephite military commander, and he's kind of taken his role as the observer again, right? And these are the things that he observes during this period of time, not a few years, right? It's actually quite a long time that he steps back and lets this kind of run its course. So I think of it as kind of like the Lord has constrained him, and such a difficult thing. We've talked about that for the past couple of weeks, past couple of episodes, where it's just got to be difficult for a Mormon to watch the despair of his people. And so just remember that's the context here.
And so we are we're starting the chapter at 363rd year. And at this point, the Nephites go to battle against the Lamanites in, it says, out of the land desolation. And it's the results of this is that the armies of the Nephites are driven back again into the land of desolation. And I feel like for me to explain the way these battles happen, I feel like the best way is just to read the scriptures, because I'm not the best at summarizing. And so I'm just going to summarize this while reading verse 2. So we see that the Nephites are driven back after they come up to battle against the Lamanites. And it says, and while they were yet weary, a fresh army of the Lamanites did come upon them, and they had a sore battle, insomuch that the Lamanites did take possession of the city of desolation, and did slay many of the Nephites, and did take them prisoners. And then in verse 3, we see that there's a remainder, like a group that escaped and fled to join in the city of Teancum. And that was near the borders of the seashore, which was around the city desolation as well. So some people were captured and some were not, and fled into the city of Teancum. So just like a little play-by-play of the wars. And there's going to be lots of these play-by-plays.
Yeah, and I really appreciate it too, because these chapters can get really difficult to, like, you almost need like a map. You need to like draw it out to figure out where all the things are. And so I appreciate Shelby really giving us that play-by-play.
So then at this point, we see that they're overtaken. But it says, but we get some insight here. So this is kind of like a pause, I feel like, to some insight that Mormon's giving us. He says, and it was because the armies of the Nephites went up unto the Lamanites that they began to be smitten. For were it not for that, the Lamanites could have had no power over them. So what I'm reading here is that had the Nephites not even gone to battle at the beginning of this chapter, this wouldn't have happened. But it was because of their pride from the previous chapters of success in battle that they were like, we're going to take on the Lamanites. And obviously they did not succeed, as we just read. And so, but the phrase that got me was, for were it not for that, the Lamanites could have had no power over them. Mormon straight up says, if they had just stayed put and not been prideful and sought more power or whatever the motivation would be, this wouldn't have happened. But it did.
Yeah. And Mormon drives home this principle where in verse 5 he says, but behold, the judgments of God will overtake the wicked, and it is by the wicked that the wicked are punished. And it's almost like the Nephites have done this to themselves. Actually, it's not like they did 100% do this to themselves over a very long period of time of descent into iniquity. And I've given this little anecdotal story recently, but there's a book called Musashi, and it's about the Japanese samurai Ronin, Miyamoto Musashi. And in it, there's a part where Miyamoto is hanging up in a tree, awaiting punishment, awaiting trial for a crime that he's committed. And a monk walks by, and he's asking this monk, please help me, I'll be a changed man if you get me down. I don't want to be this bad guy anymore. And the monk says, I can't untie the ropes around you because I didn't tie them, you did. And when we understand that really it is our own actions that actually restrict our freedom, right? We lose our agency when we give it away to the adversary, right? Through our actions. As we remain obedient to the commandments and put our trust and strength in the Lord and his promises that he's made to us, then we retain our agency and we can make our decisions freely. We may have other people's agency may come in and affect us, right? The Lamanites can still come and attack the Nephites, and some will die, but it is now their misuse of their agency that has brought them to this point.
So I want to give like a modern day example. And if I can't get this out very clearly, we might cut this from the episode. But I feel like when it says it is by the wicked that the wicked are punished, when I think about today, I think about the ideologies of men and certain ideologies that are being promoted, and they're not rooted in truth or even reason. They're very foolish. And for those that believe them and start to live them, that then brings upon themselves the very causes of their actions. So, and I don't want to get like too political and pinpoint an ideology, but I'm just saying there are ideologies out there that if followed and choices are made, then the choices that you reap, the decisions of your choices, whether they're good or they're bad, and then those choices that are made, the consequences become the downfall, right? That's the wicked punishing the wicked. Well, you came up with that ideology or believed that ideology, you lived it, and now you're reaping the consequences, and it's probably from other people who chose to do wicked. So I hope I explained that right. If you have any thoughts or things you want to add, please reach out to us and let us know.
Yeah. No, I haven't done all of my due diligence in this study, but it is something that I heard recently, and it's kind of in the backlog of things to study. And so I'll share it with you all here. There's only 2 places in the Book of Mormon, locations, that are translated into actual English. What are they, Shelby?
I don't know.
Desolation.
Oh, okay.
And bountiful.
Okay.
Okay. Now
I know. Desolation and bountiful.
Now, I don't know exactly what that means. Okay. But I do think it's important that we have to remember that the record which we have was abridged, and there was commentary added by Mormon. Okay. Now, sometimes we get these drops of prophecy and revelation from Mormon, and I wonder if there's something there with how he wrote down the names of these places, and this possession of the city desolation. This was like what the Nephites took as their last possession before it was taken from them. So they didn't even they had nothing. Like, what does desolation mean? We'll go, I pulled it up in the 1828 Webster's Dictionary. The first definition is the act of desolating, destruction, or expulsion of inhabitants. And it also says destruction, ruin, and waste. The expulsion of inhabitants was very interesting to me. And so I want to go back and pull the thread, because it's not the first time that the land desolation or the city desolation has come up in the scriptures. So I want to go back and identify what all has happened in the land desolation, and what all, does, like, what's related to the land. Because remember that the Book of Mormon, a massive arc, if you will, like the theme through the Book of Mormon is that the land has a covenant associated with it, right? So, like, inasmuch as you keep my commandments, you'll prosper in the land. We've even read recently through 3rd Nephi that, like, a curse was put on the land, right? So this fact that the Nephites are being driven to and fro, it's their land if they want it, right? If they keep the commandments, they can prosper in the land. But as they've descended into such depravity and wickedness, they can't gain possession of even desolation, right? I don't know. There's something there. And like I said, I'm not prepared to fully, this is not my dissertation on the land desolation in the Book of Mormon, but there's something there. And I just wanted to throw it out there for posterity, because on the next round through the Book of Mormon, I'll be more prepared to discuss it more fully.
So, after Mormon gives us that commentary, he brings us back into the battle, the warfare. And the Lamanites, at this point, they had the land of desolation, like Kevin talked about. Now they want to take the city Teancum, because some of the people fled there, right? And so in this 364th year, so the next year, the Lamanites come against the city Teancum. However, they are repulsed and driven back by the Nephites. And because they're driven back, the Nephites get a boast of strength, is what it says. It says, And when the Nephites saw that they had driven the Lamanites, they did again boast of their own strength, and they went forth in their own might and took possession again of the city desolation. So at this point, we saw that they lost it. The Lamanites now, I would assume because maybe of their pride and power, then come against the Nephites to take Teancum. They drive him back, and the Nephites are so happy about that it gets their pride up, and then they actually go back and take the city desolation again. So it's this constant battle of the city of desolation. And it said that there were lots that were slain because of this. There had been thousands slain on both sides over these battles. And in verse 10, we get some more insight to the Nephites. It's in the 366 year. The Lamanites again came unto the Nephites to battle. But we get this insight that I'm talking about here. It says, the Nephites repented not of the evil they had done, but persisted in the wickedness continually. And I feel like this is important because it sets up a lot of things that are going to be talked about the wickedness that's happening. And it's also interesting that it's right before this battle again. So we had battle 1 in the beginning. We just had battle 2. Now they've taken desolation again. And now there's this battle 3 where Lamanites are coming again into the Nephites to battle. But before we know the outcome of the battle, let's talk about the wickedness, is what I hear Mormons saying. Like, what's going on in this time period? And so if I can read verse 11, it says, and it is impossible for the tongue to describe, or for man to write a perfect description of the horrible scene of the blood and carnage which was among the people, both of the Nephites and of the Lamanites. And every heart was hardened, so that they delighted in the shedding of blood. And there never had been so great wickedness among all the children of Lehi, nor even among all the house of Israel, according to the words of the Lord, as was among this people. So that's, like, we could unpack that for a second. You read this, and the first sentence to me is he's telling us, Mormon saying, it's impossible for me to write what I'm seeing or to describe what I'm seeing in a perfect description, right? He does mention some things, but man, this is a horrible, horrible scene taking place between the Nephites and the Lamanites. Like, if we can just imagine, I don't know what scene of warfare comes into your mind, but picture that like times 10 worse. That's what I would say Mormon's trying to describe. And the key is the wickedness. Like, it's persisting because of the wickedness. They're not repenting. Every heart is hard.
Right. The wickedness is so great because there's no repentance. Like, there's not even a feeling of godly sorrow, like to spur repentance. Like, they're so far gone, right? And I mean, we live in a harsh world, you know? I mean, just last year we had the, in our current history, we had the attack on Israel by Hamas. And that was a brutal attack, right? That was a truly wicked attack. And now that entire region is engulfed in horrific warfare, right? And so unfortunately, we do have like images today that we can associate with this. But I think the reason that Mormon says that it's impossible for the tongue to describe or write a perfect description is because of the spiritual implications and the spiritual decay. And like, also, it's just hard. It's hard to talk about, right? And again, this is the guy who he was commanded, I guess admonished, to observe and record what he saw.
Yeah.
And he, having this gift for being quick to observe, and obviously a gift of writing, he struggles to describe it. So let that sink in.
So this battle number 3, right? He gives us this description before he tells us the outcome. But the Lamanites take the land desolation back. And it says, and this because of the number did exceed the number of the Nephites. So they say just because they had more army than the Nephites, they took back the land of, or city of desolation. And it says at this point, they're like, all right, let's go for Teancum too. And once again, it says they did drive out the inhabitants out of Teancum. And as a result of this, and also the wickedness that abounds, this is where they take the women and the children as prisoners, and they offer them up as sacrifices unto their idol gods. So they're worshiping the wrong people, the wrong gods, right? Gods that don't even exist, that they've made up in their own image. And so that's kind of that battle. That's battle number 3. And we get some insight in verse 15. So this all happens in the 367th year. And it says that the Nephites being angry because the Lamanites had sacrificed their women and their children, that they then go against the Lamanites with exceedingly great anger. So here's battle number 4. They're mad about their women and their children. So they come up to battle against them and drive the Lamanites out of their land. And so they do take possession, I'm assuming, back the land of Teancum and desolation. I don't know. It doesn't specify which land, but it does say they did beat again the Lamanites and drive them out of their lands. So battle number 4, done, right? They fought back. So just this constant back and forth. And we get a little bit of a pause. So that happened in the 367th year. And then in verse 16, it says that the Lamanites don't come again unto the Nephites until the 375th year. So they get a pretty long break from 67 to 75, which must be nice. But still, wickedness abounds, right? It's not going away. For whatever reason, there's a break. Do you have anything you want to add, Kev? Sorry, I'm kind of just going through the things here. So there we are. Now we're in the 375th year. And the Nephites now are going to, it says, the Nephites with all their powers, and they were not numbered because of the greatness of their number. So they don't have a lot of people from how I'm reading this, especially because the battle before last, the Lamanites had more than they did. And that's why they won.
No.
Right?
No. In verse 17, it's saying, and in this year they, the Lamanites, did come down against the Nephites with all their powers. And they were not numbered because of the greatness of their number. Meaning the Lamanites were so powerful and so great in number that you could not number them. So an overwhelming force comes to take the Nephites.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. See, it's easy to get lost in the battles. Yep. Thank you.
And to continue in verse 18, and from this time forth did the Nephites gain no power over the Lamanites, but began to be swept off by them, even as a dew before the sun.
So that's insane, because at this point, like I said, there's been this back and forth, and now we know from this time forth, they're no longer going to have any more power over the Lamanites. What does a dew before the sun mean?
Well, like dew is the moisture that settles like on the ground overnight. And then when the sun comes up, obviously that the heat then evaporates that moisture. So he's using this metaphor for them just being taken away, like swept, like he again sweeps. They're swept off. And I also think it's like, because they trust in their own power, which is weak and fallible, they're taken over by this like overwhelming power. Like the dew can't resist the sun. Like it's natural, right? I don't know.
Yeah, no, thank you. And this is that battle 5, I would say, in this chapter here, where the Lamanites come upon them like a dew before the sun, right? And they're swept off. And they continue to come against them, and they come down to the city of desolation, and we hear of another battle, like battle number 6. There's a sore battle fought in the land of desolation in which they did beat the Nephites. And it's just so interesting to me because I just keep going back to there was this back and forth, but now it's like complete desolation in the land.
Yeah.
Desolation. And like at this point, I don't even think it matters who wins because there's been so much like evil done,
Well, and like, what are they fighting for? And what are they trying to gain? Like they're struggling for their lives. That's what it talks about later on. Actually, I think it's in the next chapter 5, verse 2. It talks about, their struggle for their lives. And that same verse also talks about the same thing in the previous chapter, where they're only fighting for their base survival at this point, which is grim, right? It's because they've lost any cause greater than that, just out of desperation. But to kind of move through the next couple verses, they actually flee. So after the land of desolation is taken in a sore battle by the Lamanites, the Nephites fled again in verse 20 from before them, and they came to the city Boaz, and there they did stand against the Lamanites with exceeding boldness, insomuch that the Lamanites did not beat them until they had come again the second time. Again, like this, sure, they can withstand for a short time, but overall, like there is this ultimate defeat coming. It's imminent. And then when they had come the second time, the Nephites were driven and slaughtered with an exceedingly great slaughter. Their women and their children were again sacrificed unto idols. Now, I don't know about you, but when a people's women and children are being killed in mass numbers, the future of that people is in peril, right? So, this is truly an annihilation occurring of the people of Nephi. Okay. So in verse 22, it came to pass that the Nephites did again flee, taking all the inhabitants with them, both in towns and villages. And now I, Mormon, seeing that the Lamanites were about to overthrow the land, therefore I did go to the hill Shem, and did take up all the records which Ammoron had hid up unto the Lord. So he goes and secures the record because there's no coming back to this land, right? And that's interesting. The Lamanites were about to overthrow the land. When you overthrow something, it's done. Like there's no restoration to the land.
At least at this time.
Correct. For that people.
Yeah.
Unless they can repent.
But Mormon goes and takes up the records, hides them up into the hill Shem. So he's prepping because he knows what's up. And so Mormon chapter 5 is actually a little bit interesting because I'm just going to tap into it for a second. the Mormon hides up the plates, and then he goes forth among the Nephites, and he repents of the oath which he had made to them, that he would no longer assist them. And they actually give him command again unto the armies. So it's kind of like a little preview of next week. But it's not some gracious victory that's about to happen.
Right, this isn't the comeback story.
Yeah,
unfortunately
not. But I think the biggest comeback in here is that the records were hit up.
Yes, and there are still righteous principles and promises that are extended to the people. And Mormon, he keeps his eyes single to the glory of God in all of this. Mm-hmm. And we also see that faith promoted in his son Moroni, who we will also hear from and read about before the end of this book. So,
talk about bringing up children in a wicked world.
Yeah, I mean, you spend your whole life battling not only a ruthless enemy, a foreign enemy that's invading and trying to overtake your land, but also struggling with the spiritual warfare against your people. I mean, it's rough.
I brought that up too because I heard something from Elder Holland on like an Instagram reel this week that the Book of Mormon is filled with literal physical battle because it was fought. It was fought back then. And it has implication to the spiritual battle that's being fought. And this mother was asking, like, how do I raise my kids in a world like today? And meaning 2024. And, Elder Holland drew the comparison of all these war chapters. Like it's the reason he said, I feel like the reason there's so many war chapters is because we can imply the spiritual implications from it and learn from it and know that you're not going to send your kids out on the field, the war field, and let them die. Like you're going to equip them with truth and knowledge and power so that they can withstand the spiritual battles that they fight every single day on the field. And so that just like the question is, how do I raise children in this world? It's you equip them. There's no avoiding it. You can't protect your child. You have to teach your child how to protect themselves so that they can then stand for truth and for righteousness in a spiritual sense.
And look around you at the other people who are failing in their own battles. And what are they missing? Right? They don't have the equipment. They don't have the spiritual power in their lives. They don't prioritize God, right? They've kind of, they go their own way and trust in their own strength. And that's what they're left with. And so, but that's also your opportunity to reach out to them and to show them a better way. Because unlike in these accounts that we're reading about now, there is time. There's a little while longer that we can bring and gather Israel. And that is the most important thing that we can do right now.
Right. And I was just going to add this too. I had this thought earlier that, the time is not yet because there's still people who I think are willing to repent and willing to change their heart. And there are lots of hearts that are on the earth today that are not hardened, that are very turned towards God. And for that reason, I believe the gathering of Israel is still taking place. And that's why the Lord hasn't come yet, because there's still people whose hearts will change and who will hear the message of the gospel. And I just want to point out for posterity's sake, I hope that whenever you're listening to this, you feel equipped to take on the spiritual battles of your day. And if you don't, reach out to mom and dad, like whatever age you are that you're listening to this. If you feel like you're spiritually failing or you don't have something in your life, like come talk to your dad and I, or your grandpa and I. Like, we are here to help you equip yourself, because we've been through some of the battles in our day, and now I know they're not the same as your day, but the armor that we put on didn't change. So because it's the same armor, it can take on new battles. So that's just my invitation to posterity.
Well, that was episode 200. I almost said 100 something, but 200. We did cross that milestone. We appreciate those who listen and join us each week, and we're gonna keep trucking on.
Talk to you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
My dear brothers and sisters, I promise that as you prayerfully study the Book of Mormon every day, you will make better decisions every day. I promise that as you ponder what you study, the windows of heaven will open, and you will receive answers to your own questions and direction for your own life.